My company is a fully remote company. I think a lot of management practices as written don't work exactly for remote companies.
When you've got remote people, you have to double down, triple down on reminding people of what I call the win. One simple practice I use for my own team is we have what we call a win board. And it is, I think a lot of managers are like, I kind of trust everyone. I never recommend giving someone 100% of the vote, but giving someone 51% of the vote says, I got some really bad leadership advice. Maybe it was the worst possible advice.
We are back with another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast, a startup advice show where we answer the real questions about what's going on in your life and in your business. So if you have questions or you're trying to put out fires, send us an email and we'll get to it on the show. Send those emails to podcast@joeldtrapani.com. I'm your host, Joel DiTrapani, and today I'm excited to be joined again by one of my all-time favorite authors, Liz Wiseman. I'm genuinely shocked she came on the show the first time, and I'm even more shocked she came on again. Liz is an incredibly smart and thoughtful leader who has a special gift for communication and storytelling. Liz Wiseman is a researcher and executive advisor who teaches leadership to top organizations worldwide. She wrote the bestsellers Multipliers, The Multiplier Effect, Rookie Smarts, and Impact Players. More books than you could say on one breath. She's the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm headquartered in Silicon Valley. Some of her recent clients include Apple, AT&T, Disney, Meta, Google, Microsoft, Nike, Salesforce, Tesla, and X. Liz has received the Top Achievement Award for Leadership from Thinkers 50. She's also consistently been named one of the world's leading 50 management thinkers, its biannual ranking. This is a long list of accolades, but I discovered Liz and her work when I first read Multipliers, a book that had a profound impact on me and my business. It is the single best book in the world about leadership and management, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. It has to be one of my top recommended books of all time. Through her experience and research, Liz makes it clear just what makes an exceptional manager and gives clear, actionable advice on how you can learn those traits. I create a plan for my upcoming week. Every single week, in that plan that I read to myself every single time is my own short summary of the book to always remind me how to be the best leader possible. And the multiplier is like a goal that I'm constantly in pursuit of. Liz is an expert at leadership and team building. So let's jump into it. Welcome, Liz. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And I know you say you have read Multipliers numerous times, but I feel like we need to have a deal that, I should come on your show for every time you reread the book.
You're going to be coming on a lot.
It just seems reasonable.
It's I like it. Well, I'm going to put a little note away to hit you up next time I read the book with my next kind of insights that I take away from the book. Awesome. Well, let's jump straight to the questions today. Let's get as much advice out there as we can. So this first challenge is called, how do you trust your employees? I own a small design and marketing agency. I've been providing services like this to some degree for half of my life. Over the last few years, I started bringing in part-time contractors to offset some of that work to them. My goal has been to create systems so that they can manage a lot of the work while I'm more hands-off. I did a lot of this all on my own for a long time. While I do have the desire to offset that way of working, I find that I don't necessarily trust anyone as much as I would like. My team, for the most part, is great, and I try my best to give them the tools they need to not quite need me as much. And I find myself not giving them as much opportunity to do the things on their own as I could. Suspect in a big part, it's me just being nervous to let go. What are some things you've done successfully to offload your work to employees? While at the same time, how can you be intentional and trusting and actually let go? What are some of the ways in which you are managing expectations, ensuring that the job is getting done correctly, enough to not be directly involved in everything? And this question is from Skeletor Zinks.
That's a great question. There's so much packed into that. And man, just listening to it, I felt these pangs of nervousness of all of the times that I wanted to trust people with important work, but honestly, I wasn't sure I did. And that kind of conundrum of I want to trust, but I'm not entirely, like maybe I don't have the evidence I need to trust. And I imagine other people listening felt that same experience. Like, what does it make you feel or think about, Joel?
I went through years of this. I'm a lot better at it now, but letting go I think it's hard for everyone, at least when you're doing a good job, unless you hate your job. But, I think letting go is hard. I face this time and time again. I feel like I'm getting better at it now and being willing to let go, but it took a long time to become comfortable with it, for sure.
Yeah, it does take time to be comfortable. And I know early on in my career, I struggled with this, and I got some really bad leadership advice early on in my career, and maybe it was the worst possible advice. my boss said to me, Liz, your job as the leader of the team is to do everything that is new, important, and hard. Like, you do that, and then your team should do everything else. And it made a lot of sense. Like, oh, okay, I should trust myself with the hard, complex stuff and let other people do the easy stuff. And it was terrible guidance because, fast forward 6 months, I'm doing all the hard stuff. Everyone else is going home at reasonable times. I'm stuck there. And I'm also getting all the visibility and all of the credit. I'm hogging all the hard work, but I'm also hogging the spotlight that goes with the hard work. And you can imagine what that does to then further erode trust. And it took me a while to realize, no. I need to share this load. And so how do you learn to trust people with things that are new and hard and important? And, I think our heart may tell us, oh, just trust people, it'll work out. But I think this is one where you need to let your head prevail in this. And I think what I've learned to do is try to trust more fully and completely on something that is more narrow. So rather than say, hey, here you go, let me give you a big, hard, important piece of work, and I totally trust you. What that does is sometimes we're pleasantly surprised by that, but it can take us down this bungee boss route where it's okay, I trust you. Ooh, that's definitely not what I was thinking. Let me pull that back, which is saying, I don't trust you. I don't think you can do this. And so next time you go to trust someone with a piece of work, they're going to be wobbly. Your trust for them will be wobbly. What we are far more better doing is being, I guess, entertaining a healthy degree of skepticism about how much we can entrust people with something important or hard and say, I'm going to give this person something more narrow, but within that narrower scope, I'm going to trust them completely. So one of the practices I like to use, I learned this, in the process of researching and writing Multipliers, was to give someone 51% of the vote. And I think a lot of managers are like, okay, hey, I want everyone to own it. I kind of trust everyone. And they give people this fake level of responsibility of something broad, which ends up leading to dashed dreams and lowered trust, is instead give someone 51% of the vote, which is saying, I trust you, which is giving them power and empowerment on something that you are willing to give them 51% of the vote on. I never recommend giving someone 100% of the vote because that erodes collaboration. But giving someone 51% of the vote says, this is your area of expertise. I'm going to back you, but I also want you to listen to me, listen to other people, take input into consideration, but I'm going to trust you with this. But, with this narrowing of scope, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the largest amount I can give someone and I still trust them, but narrow enough so that if they do it badly or wrong, we can still recover. I won't have put them in the failure pile in my mind. And I think when we take a narrow slice of the work and someone comes back and delivers brilliantly on it, we've just added a little chip into, I guess, a little asset into the bank of, I trust this person. And then we can progressively increase that to the point where we can really give people 51% of the vote of something really broad. So it's built in little increments of trust. And then when someone inevitably really misses the mark on something important, you still have enough little credits in the bank. It doesn't completely erode your trust for that person, their competence, their capability, their intentions. That's what I've learned to do. Smaller slice, but completely empower someone within that smaller scope.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to really think about it fundamentally, which is that you need to do this step by step by step. So every single time you give someone an action, I love the way you're talking about it, but you're putting chips in the bank for that. They're earning more and more and more of your trust. A couple of thoughts that jump out to me outside of this is, the first thing I think about is that either behavior that you take here is going to steamroll and get more and more and more. It's going to become more and more and more of your relationship. So if you don't trust someone and you're giving them such specific instructions, and then they keep asking you for help, and then you keep giving them the help, and you don't trust them and you want something done in a very specific way, every time you do that, this person is going to be less empowered and they're going to ask you more questions for more exact direction. And then you're going to trust them to come up with ideas like less and less and less because you're effectively owning every single task. So this person is going to be doing tiny, tiny, tiny fragments of work for you for your bigger vision here. And the more times you do that, the more you erode this person's confidence in themselves, and you're going to erode any ability to ever trust them. By the inverse, every time you give someone a piece of work where you give them the empowerment and the belief in what they're going to do, and then you back them to do the work in an area that is, like a two-way door where like it can be undone if it's wrong, but you give them the complete trust of a vertical, like you're saying, Liz. Every time you do that, they're going to be more and more empowered to take on more and more pieces of work. So I think just be conscious of like, if you are setting, every behavior you take like sets a standard in that relationship that you should be careful of.
Yeah. Joel, you said something that I think is really important, is vision. And this is where I find things tend to go wrong, is that usually when someone misses the mark, misdelivers, gets it wrong, fails, and I don't mean failed to try, I mean like they tried and it wasn't the right thing. It's usually because the manager did not create a shared vision of what success looks like. And I just think of how many times myself, like someone has brought me back a report and I'm like, whoa, that is so not what I was expecting. Like, I even think like, man, I was expecting something with a staple, like something that was substantial enough. It required like, staple that thing. Or let me see if I've got one of these. Yeah, like, or maybe I was like, I was actually thinking that something you were going to give me required like a binder clip because it was going to be more than 10 pages and you just handed me a one pager, or the opposite. I was expecting like a summary of that research and you just gave me an entire book, not helpful. And I realize when I find myself in these situations and executives I've coached, you get these misdeliveries, these breach of trust. It's because the leader failed to describe what they were looking for. And I found that a real simple remedy for this is to describe the 3 whats. And it really helps me to communicate a vision of success. And what those 3 whats are is, number 1, describe what does great look like. It could be as simple as like, you've known you've done a great job when, like, we are on the approved vendor list. What does it look like to win at this? Number 2, describe complete. Like, you'll know you're done when. That report, like, okay, let me do grade on a report someone might give you. You know you've done a great job when all of the key insights from the report are highlighted and visible, like in a 3-minute read of the first page. That's what great looks like. You're done when I can forward this up to our senior leadership team without making any amendments to it. That's what done looks like. Free of typos, whatever. And then, like, what is not the job is the third what, which is what's out of bounds. Like, this is not part of the work. Like, I don't need a summary of this or a review of that. And so when the boss describes the 3 whats, they're taking like that vision of here's what a good piece of work looks like, and they're putting that into the head of the other person. And it is amazing, like, what happens when people can share this vision of success. Like, so often we're just like, bring me a rock. No, not that rock. I don't want a sharp rock. Like, no, that's too big of a rock.
I love that rock example, to be honest. I feel like that makes things really clear, but I don't even want to go any deeper into this question because I feel like you've hit on the one thing that I've taken away from Multipliers more than anything else, which is that clear expectations are what make the difference between an employee being great or not and the difference between a manager being great or not. And if someone understands what success looks like, they can deliver that for you. And so maybe from that point there, I'll try and bring this question to a close and try and summarize this for Skeletor Zinc. So how do you start trusting your employees more? The first thing is that you don't need to wholeheartedly trust someone from day one, okay? You want to work together. You want them to trust you. You want to trust them a whole lot more. And that happens by taking the right steps where every single task or project that you give them, you're going to earn more. There's going to be more and more chips, more and more credit in the bank of trust for them. So start with very narrow projects. Start with projects where you understand what great looks like, where you can make that clear to them. And then over time, give them progressively more and more and more space to roam and to run and to come back to you on bigger, more difficult, more complex projects. but start narrow where you deeply understand it. And the most important thing is share with them what you expect of their work. Don't just say, go and build me an app. Don't say, go and bring me a rock. Be very clear about what you want, what success looks like, how long you expect it to take, the length, the shape, and give them as much context about the high level requirements here so that they know where to run. Give them a fence to work with it. Anything I missed there, Liz?
Perfect.
Amazing. All right, Cielto Zinks, you have been advised. And we'll move on to our next question. This question is called, how do you actually manage remote teams? I just hired my first employee and she works remotely. I'm aiming to hire more remote hybrid employees, and I'm wondering, what best practices have you found to maximize productivity and accountability? Prior to the pandemic, it was a goal of mine to have a cool, hip style at the office, ping pong table, kitchen full of snacks, etc. But now I realize I don't need an office, and people prefer to work remotely. I live in a major city, so why pay expensive major city overhead? The client I worked with last year had a dream office, startup vibe, pool table, cool themed meeting rooms, but was venting to me that he pays a ton to lease the space and nobody wants to come in. So we're going to go remote. But how do you do that? What makes the differences on the people side of things?
I think a lot of people can relate to this one, don't you?
Yeah. I think about this one a lot because my company is a fully remote company. And I think a lot of management practices as written don't work exactly for remote companies. I think you need to reduce some expectations and increase some expectations. And yeah, so I'm very excited to see what you think on this because I think we are in a remote world, or at least a hybrid world right now. And I think the way you manage teams has had to shift with that.
I think it's really, really different. Joel, like you, I manage an entirely remote team. We've been remote for, 10 plus years. So we were doing this long before the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, we're like, okay, we just need to amp up what we're doing. Here are a few things I've learned doing this. I want to focus on vision and relationships. Those are probably the two things I want to focus on. The first is vision. And that is to like, as leaders, remind ourselves that there are certain things that are really hard for people to see when they're remotely. Like, maybe we'll start with the things that are hard for managers to see. Like, what makes managers nervous is like, I don't know what they're doing. I do not know if they are folding their laundry on these conference calls. As one of my contractors, he said, oh yeah, I fold laundry, on conference calls. I'm not there. But like, manager, like, what are you doing when I can't see you? So it is kind of this trust exercise. And you have to get over like the things that managers can't see that make them nervous. But I want to focus on what your team can't see. I think it's easier to do work when you're remotely. What's hard to do is to see the bookends of your work, the top and tail of your work. So it's hard to know context. It's hard to see what's important when you work remotely. So when you are in person, you kind of get a sense of what's important, because usually what's important in an organization is not the document that gets made into a poster on the wall or sent out as the annual strategic priorities. Like, what's important on any given day is usually in the air. It's what people are like, whoa, fire drill. This is like, a 5-alarm fire. We have a problem. Like, you could tell the boss is agitated about something. Like, these are things that we get, these physical clues when we're in person that tell us, okay, we have something happening over here and it's important and we need to divert our attention to this thing. It is so hard to see when we are working remotely. And so leaders, when you've got remote people, you have to double down, triple down on reminding people of what I call the win. What's important now. And, we have maybe like annual strategic objectives or things that are important this quarter, but to remember that that is dynamic and you are like now focused on what's important, but you haven't necessarily shared that with your team. One simple practice I use for my own team is we have what we call a win board. And it is what's important now. It is on Google Docs. Everyone has edit permission on it. So instead of like, here's a strategy of all the priorities for the quarter, this can be updated by anyone on the team at any moment. You could look at it and go, oh yeah, like that's not a top priority. Something else is in there. People can kind of call like, hey, here's this thing that I'm working on. And we review that, but create a dynamic way to communicate, here's what's important. The other thing that's really hard for people to see is the impact of their work. Like the middle part's pretty easy, the doing of the work. Let's say you are a financial analyst and, you've been asked to do a profitability analysis for the various product lines because, you're trying to decide which apps you're going to invest in and which you're going to, let languish or whatever. Well, that financial analyst might do that work and submit it off to the head of product or to her boss. But then, in the office, what would happen is people would say, oh, by the way, Janthi, that analysis you did, we just came out of this meeting. It helped us make this decision about where to invest. Like, atta girl. Like that would happen so naturally in an office, but remote, we send our stuff off. We don't really know, did anyone open this? Did they really read my email? Did they use it? Where did it go? Did I waste my time on that? Was that all for naught? Like managers help people see the impact of their work. Like those chains of causality get broken in the remote world. And we need to loop back to say, by the way, that analysis you did, that thing was so useful. Here's where that went. Here's what we did. Or giving people intel, you know what, we ended up not using it because it was too long. And so giving people that intel from their work and the impact of their work becomes increasingly important. Those are two things that are really hard for people to see, what's hot and the impact of our work. Is there anything else that you notice it's hard for people to see or recognize or divine or intuit when they're working remotely?
I talk about this question a lot, internally and externally. And I've never thought about approaching it from that perspective, which is what can't people see? And I love that so much, it is when you're at the top of an organization, almost everything all of the time because you're trying to pull the strings or put the puzzle pieces together, to understand, a little bit more money here, a little bit more effort there, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really easy to take that for granted. And what you're saying is it is hard for an individual contributor to understand how their work is contributing. So what should they be working on? So having that win board or having, that a clear understanding at a top level of what is important at the company level, at a team level, at an individual level, making that very clear because a lot of people don't understand how their work fits in. I love that. That's a really good way to think about it. And another one is that I have seen what you're saying come up a lot, which is people don't understand or see the impact of their work, especially when it's good. When someone's work isn't good, that feedback comes back very easily. But when someone's work is good, it's I'm going to take that, I'm now going to use this over here, and by moving forward. And that's not saying good job, okay? Just because you think that in your head, but I used to work, that recognition does suffer in a remote environment. And that's a good reminder for me because I forget about that a lot.
I know, we just move forward. And, I feel this pain. I'm often doing webinars and I'll pour my heart and soul into it and do these teaches. And then we finish and we all leave the Zoom or the big meeting. And I'm I wonder if that was any good.
Yeah.
And then I'm always I get these, the clients will often say, so how do you think that was? I'm well, I would have absolutely no idea. Yeah, I need you to tell me that because it is we are working, I often find myself teaching into these voids. And, you do get a little bit of yummies and loves at the end of webinars, hey, that's great, super awesome. But it's easy to just do great work and have people go, okay, great, fine, that worked. Let's move on to the next thing. So in the remote world, people need that. I think the second thing we should talk about here is what it's hard for people to feel when they're remote, and which gets us into other things that get fractured is relationship and the other kind of the links, not between people and the work and the why and the where it goes, but the connections between people obviously get thinner and they fracture more easily. And so part of the manager's job, if you are going to lead a remote team, you need to take upon you that you're now a relationship manager in that team, and that it's not just connecting people's work, it's connecting people to each other. One of the practices that we on our team started in the beginning of the pandemic, and the pandemic really helped us do this, but we have continued to do it, is we just started with, how are you? In fact, during the pandemic, we held a meeting every Friday, and there was one agenda item on the meeting, and then it was, how are you? And how are you physically? How are you emotionally? How are you mentally? Just how are you? And we just filled up our whole meeting just checking in, staying connected. And we know that, people had very different experiences in the pandemic, but like it was like a lifeline for a lot of people. Like, okay, I'm still part of something. I still have colleagues, and we continue that practice. I think the ratio shifts, but I find when we do our all hands team check-in, we spend easily 50% of our time, whether we are digitally gathering or physically gathering. We spend sometimes upwards of 50% of our time just checking in. How are you? And there's so many varieties of this. It's like, how are you? I am an optimist by nature. It's one of my multipliers, accidental diminisher tendencies. I am like positive, can do. And to counter that, I spend a lot of time asking people to talk about what's hard and what sucks. And I remember once we had an in-person meeting. We have an all-remote team. This is pre-pandemic. And we started it with we were doing the normal check-ins, like, hey, how's it going? What are you proud of? Like, what's something good in your life? And I'm like, we got to get past all that. And so I think the check-in I did, the whole team was all gathered. Our time together is precious. I'm like, what's something you are disappointed in? And what's something that you didn't get done that you're kind of embarrassed about? Like, what's something you're not proud of? And at first people looked at me like, was she crazy? Like, we're going to use your time talking about our failures. And first people are a little slow to warm up because it's a lot easier to say, hey, I got this done and I'm really proud of it. And this was a win. And people said, you know what? I was really hoping to have got that done. I really didn't. But, and by the end, it's this like catharsis that's happening amongst the group. But, sometimes our check-ins will be, hey, here are the prompts. How are you? Or what's something you're proud of? What's something that is really sucks in your world right now? What's something that's eating away? What are you worried about? And we let people just choose the prompt. And how you do it is not as important as that you do it. And I hear over and over from the people on my team, like, thank you. I just feel like we're part of a team of real humans who care about each other. And again, I'm an optimist by nature and I'm productive by nature. Like, I don't like wasting productive meeting time on how are you? But I have found it has been absolutely essential to having people work together. That's one thing. And I would add one other thing that I think I've learned is really important if you lead a remote team is to get yourself out of the hub position as a leader. You might have a heightened responsibility towards ensuring that relationships are happening and people are being connected. But if everything is going through you, you have a strong relationship, but what you want is for people to have strong relationships with each other. And so as a leader, you want to set a tone where people can just connect with each other without going through you. And you have to be okay not being in the know and not being the hub. And I remember one time someone on my team, she said, oh, Liz, did you know that we have a meeting every week that you're not invited to? We know you're busy and you don't need to be there, but, we call it it was like the LKJO meeting because that was the first initial of the people. She said, we don't want to wait for you to tell us what's important. We just get together and I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I want to have happen. And I think as a leader, we have to take ourselves out of the role of everything goes through me. It's no, work together. And it's kind of the model I would suggest is, as a parent, you want your kids to have a great relationship. If you've got more than one child, you want them to have not kill each other when they're young, but when they grow up, you want your kids to like each other. And sometimes I find parents are no, you guys are having lunch with me. You didn't invite me. And what you need to do as a parent is say, I'm so glad my daughters are connecting. I'm so glad my children want to be together. And I'm not instigating in that, and I'm not always included in that. But that's what's going to build healthy relationships in the long run. And I think as the boss, you've got to be willing to not be the hub and not necessarily be the instigator.
I love that. Just so simply to put that as not being the hub there, and it's something I'm very guilty of because it's so easy to be the hub. But one thing I want to ask as a kind of follow up to this question is that I have this belief that not everyone is actually well suited to remote. So one way that you have a good remote team is that you hire people who want to be in a remote company and thrive in a remote company. I don't know if that's just, maybe me allowing for, giving myself an excuse to run a poor remote culture. So how do you feel about that?
Well, I do think there are some people who do better in a remote environment. Conversely said, there are some people who need an in-person environment more than others. I also think there's life stages where there are times when people really need an in-person environment. And I think we are seeing kind of at a larger social level what happens when young people start their careers in a remote environment and never have a chance to have that like in-office culture built. And so I think there might be some larger trends to that, some demographic trends about who does better in a remote environment. But I think as leaders, we need to recognize like this person might be at a stage of their life where they can handle remote, and someone else might be at a stage of their life where actually that's not going to be good for them. Like it's actually going to put them in a state of lonely anxiousness. It's hard because companies are trying to establish company-wide policies, but where you have latitude to make that individual, I think you're going to help optimize that for people.
Okay, that's good. I totally agree with that. If people want to be part of a remote company, great, but you can't force everyone to be part of a remote company. Like have people take on the jobs that they want. So you've covered so much good ground here, Liz. I'm going to do my best to summarize this, but I may miss a few pieces. So just let me know. So how do you effectively manage a great remote team? I guess, a couple of the high level thoughts are a remote team is different to an in-person team. And a lot that you can take for granted in an in-person team doesn't happen. A lot of the social interactions don't happen. So a lot of the communications about what's important don't happen. So you really need to be very conscious about telling your team individually, as teams, as departments, what is important right now, and communicating that. So people always know that the work they're working on is important or it's not important and they should change what they're working on. But if you make it very clear about what is important, then people will feel empowered to do the right kind of work to push the company forward. The next thing is that in a remote company, it's really easy to just, forget to pat people on the back and to show people the impact of their work. So when someone does a great job or a poor job or a middling job, make sure you go back and say, hey, you did a great job, or hey, this could have improved. And feedback, every kind of feedback is so important, and it has to be way more active in a remote team. You need to make time to give the feedback to them. And you need to remind yourself constantly to do that. And then, social interactions, they don't happen by accident in a remote team. So you need to invest heavily in building relationships, both yourself, but then between others as well. And it is important to make sure that you are not always the center of every relationship. Two people shouldn't just be comfortable talking to each other when you're there. You should be building a team where everyone is comfortable talking to each other. And so that framework to me boils down to kind of like 4 key pillars that I talk about all the time, which is one is that we've already spoken about, is that clear expectations. Someone should know what you expect of them and how to win and what a task is required and, when they should be working, what they should be doing in Zoom calls. But clear expectations are the number one thing. The second thing is that in a remote team, you need to overkill with communications. You need to say stuff so many times you want to vomit in a remote team, I feel like. That's at the point that people will actually remember something when you say it again and again and again and again. You have to say the same message all the time. The third thing is social availability. Because social interactions don't happen accidentally, you need to provide a lot of space. Now, you don't need to expect everyone to come to social gatherings, but you need to build social gatherings into the way you work. Whether it's the way Liz talks about it, where, you ask, how are you? And you build that into the meeting structures you have. But I also think on top of that, you need to build a lot of social time in the team where you have like a book club or you have like a monthly hangout. You don't need people to come, but you need to give them the option for them to come. Because when you give them the option, they feel empowered that they can have those social interactions that they're craving at different points in their journey. And the last one is that I think you need to have more structured relationships than you do in a regular team. So I think things like diagonals or peers, as well as your one-on-one manager, become a whole lot more important in a remote world, because then you're not leaving interactions up to chance. You know that at least on some cadence, these people will be having the conversations that they need to give them encouragement and health and conversation challenge that they need. So that's the way I would summarize how to build a remote team. It's very complex. It's a very complex issue though. But do you think anything has been missed there, Liz?
I think it's a wonderful summary and wonderful additions to that. I guess in even taking that summary further, if we had to pick a word, it's like 2 words, more intentional. We have to be much more intentional about certain things that tend to feel invisible.
That's a great point, because I would say managing a remote team is harder to keep culture and relationships strong. But you can also, get so much more out of it. We're not even going to go into the benefits of remote. I love remote work, but that's maybe for another conversation. So that's it, List F. You have been advised. And that's all we have time for today. So let's move on to the final section of the show, which is plugs. So tell me, Liz, what's going on? What would you like to plug today?
Oh, I don't have anything to plug. Honestly, I'm working on a new book, but that's I don't even know I want to mention that, because that's
really, what's it about?
Well, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to understand the formative experiences that people have in their work life that shape and influence how we show up, and whether we have a great work life and healthy relationship to work, or work tends to be more injurious to us. But what are those formative experiences like including how does someone's first boss affect the way they work for years to come? How does their first team and their first group, and they're not all first. But anyway, that's something I'm working on and I'm interested in. I'm always happy to hear anyone who's got insights on that. And I'm still raising my books, and they're raising me. They're like children. You have them, and then they hang around for a long time, and you work on them for a long time. The Thinkers 50 organization, that part of on their list, they just announced their list of management books that are classics, and Multipliers just hit classic status, which I'm really, I just I'm delighted that a piece of work that I started 15 years ago is as relevant or more relevant today. And so, I continue to work on the ideas and multipliers and impact players, and how do you create environments where people kind of show up and can be impactful and do brilliant work. That's what I'm working on.
I love it. Well, my side of plugs, the first one is to read Liz's work, read all of her books. If you just want to know where to start, my opinion is to start with Multipliers. It has changed so much about the way I manage. I thought I was a very good manager, and then I read Liz's book and I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many mistakes I'm making that, it seemed kind of counterintuitive. I thought I was doing the right things, but since then, the people that I work with love working with me so much more. I feel like they're so much more fulfilled in their work, and the team moves so much faster because of all those principles. So take the time, go and read Multipliers. It'll change your life, and it'll absolutely change your business. And even if you just work somewhere, it'll make such a big impact on the way you work. So read that book. Then, everything else, like and subscribe to the podcast. Pull out your phone right now, 5 stars, comment on the videos, everything, do all of the good stuff. Steal a phone, do it on their phone as well. That's totally condoned on the show. Thank you to everyone who writes in. We love your problems. We love these questions. If you listen to have any other questions you want us to answer, send them through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. And lastly is that I've got a booking link in the show notes as well. So if you've got challenges in your own business and you want to talk us through, let's book in some time. I love meeting the audience and getting to know you guys kind of businesses, and that helps me shape where I take the show in the future. And that's everything. So we're going to wrap this one up. Liz, thank you so much again for coming on today. I absolutely love this conversation. I feel very inspired and challenged to go and actually change a lot of the practices that I've been accidentally doing over the past few months. So I'm going to go and take a lot of these lessons myself as well. And to everyone else, this has been another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. We'll see you all next week.